Guess guess who's back? Back again. What's going on, family? It's so funny because I think for me, it feels like we've been on vacation for ages.
Yeah, we haven't really been as active.
Right, but it's just the timing. Like, so we had our interview. We were very busy, and we had the interview, the Luisa Torre interview, which we really enjoyed. We're very grateful for. And then right after the elections came up, and so that all kind of distorted our timetable a little bit. And so now this is going to be this Wednesday's episode, but we're getting back on track, and it's coming back to it. But since this is not an interview, you're going to need to talk more this episode.
Oh, hush.
Okay, no, because you're like, you're focused on our third partner for the show.
That's what a mother does.
No, fair enough. I totally get that. I appreciate that. I respect that. Would you want me to feed her?
No, sir, I got it.
Okay, so it's funny because I was thinking about this episode, and I think we're past the point where I can be like, well, this is a special topic to me, and I'm really passionate about this because everything that we do,
every episode
is like a special topic that I'm really passionate about, and partly it's because I'm a passionate person, but also in terms of this show and this cast and what we do, it's because I love my people. I love our people. I love our people. And I want the best for us. I always want the best for us, and this is another one of those conversations, just like the last episode and just like the interview, where it needs to be had, because one of the worst things that you can have that really destroys and affects us as a community is how much people suffer in silence. And I think something that we've touched on and that Okasan has done a really good job of explaining in great detail is the cultural reasons for why people do it. And I think that's one of the things that's so dope about our opposing views in terms of solutions and how we come to things, like not even in a negative way. Like our love displays itself in different ways. So I think for you, a lot, your intent is to say, this is not malicious, this is not meant to be hurt, this is just who we are, and this is how we came about. And I think for me, I skip right over that a lot, and my love is, like, I don't give a fuck how it happened, I just want to make it better.
More like understanding the reasonings for why this is, and like that is a part of how we move forward too, is like,
right.
Like really pinpointing why is this come about, why is this an issue for us,
and like, that's another great thing that really helps,
instead of just moving straight to the solution, which you often do, and be
right.
like, this is how we do it.
But that's something that's amazing about you, and something that our show really benefits from, because I think, until I started having conversations post our show getting traction, I take for granted that maybe people don't know these things. And so, I just assume that everybody's at where I'm at with it, and I go right to the, you know what I mean? Because I think, like, even with Luisa's interview, like, we were on the same page and at the same point for a lot of it. And so I think because I'm so used to having conversations in that place, I forget that the point of this is to help other people get there. So I thank you, and I appreciate you for that.
So this episode we are covering suicide, depression, mental health, just the full
spectrum of
being Pacifica, like
people of Pacifica,
mental health issues.
Something we've established, and I'll just say it now. We are mainly Pacifica based, but even
this
though it
can really apply to ethnic,
it doesn't. There is no it can. It applies to all people of color, especially black and brown people.
So and this is not limited to Pacifica.
I think it's important for our focus, like, just in terms of, even though I represent Hawaii, I will always try and represent now our Afro-Latino, or like our brown non-Pacifica communities, and we'll keep Okasan and Shoto focused on the Pacifica, because even though this is our core and this is what we love and care about the most, and this is our home, like, I do want us to have full reach, and I don't want anyone to feel like, this doesn't apply to me, why do I listen? And like, this has just been highlighted for us recently. We were listening to a radio interview with a boxer, and he was an African American man, and he was talking about how he suffers from depression and suicide, and how those instances have popped up where he's been online on his social media calling for help. And the interviewer said, have you been to therapy? Have you talked to a professional about this? And his response was, man, I'm black, we don't do that. And your response was like, that's so unhealthy, that's really toxic.
It is, but that also occurs within the brown community, within our Pacific community.
And that's why I said that, because I wanted to highlight that this is an issue for all of us across the board. The difference is, in Pacifica, the reasons for it are even pretty similar in our community. And I know in the Latino community, in the African American community, and in the Pacifica in terms of Tonga, and it's probably the same in Samoa, there's a lot of shame that comes behind it. Like, you want to tell a story that you were just telling me last night about the lady who got fined by the village?
Oh, yeah. So I was reading that there's this Samoan lady. She was pregnant. She got pregnant out of wedlock, and the village decided to fine her 20 boxes of tuna, pretty much, because she's pregnant out of wedlock, and it's pretty much a shame on the village. It's a shame on her family. And all that it was just running through my mind is like, what about the man? Like, it doesn't take one person to have a baby. Like, it wasn't
right. And then my reply to that was, this is like in India, where when women in the Middle East, in some places, where when women get raped or they get violated, we're gonna have to put trigger warnings in. But I guess this whole episode is a trigger warning. But when women get raped and get violated, they get prosecuted, and it's like their honor is destroyed.
And I think when you were like saying it's shame, I think it's more, I don't know, shame and sacred, because there's a word in our Samoan culture, in our Samoan language, it's called tapu, and it's pretty much like sacredness, but I feel like they very closely, like the line between the two is very, we might call it's sacred, it's like a taboo subject that we don't touch because it's sacred, but there's a lot of, it's like there's a fine line,
idiosyncrasies and finities, I get
that
it.
Crosses.
But there are things to that are still inappropriate, and that can be just a label for things that I don't want to be questioned about. I remember, like, when I was little, my older cousin and my aunt, and I wrote about this in a book, I was like curious and I really wanted to know, and I was like, what is the meaning of life? And as an adult, she was really unprepared for that question, and she turned it back on me like, well, if you don't know, then I'm not going to tell you. And I think culturally we grew up with a lot of that as well, like adults not having answers for questions for younger generations, for things that they haven't thought about or had the time to think about or really break down. And instead of like, well, now let's sit down and talk about this, there's such a strong culture in all our communities of, you don't question your elders, that's taken as sacred and respect too. Well, no, you're not supposed to, you don't talk back and you don't question. So if I'm going through depression, if I'm feeling suicidal, if someone has violated me or touched me or made me feel uncomfortable and unsafe, and I don't feel safe speaking to you, how am I supposed to find a solution? Where am I supposed to get protection? Where am I supposed to get aid? And we have all of these situations in our homes where our parents and our grandparents have created spaces where it's not okay to come with them, and they don't see the disconnect. They don't understand that they've created these environments, and then we go through these things pretty often because it's something that they talk about when they talk about cops, the blue wall of silence. Cops don't snitch on each other, and cops don't report each other, and so this is our version of that as a people, as a community. You don't make your uncle look bad, and you don't, and so how are we supposed to talk to someone? And this is why suicides and depression are so prevalent in our community because we are raised with this mindset of you don't share your family's business outside of your family and outside of your home, and you don't bring shame and disrespect into your family, and you don't question your elders. And then these things happen, and then when they eventually find out or somebody is dead, is, well, why didn't they talk to me? Why didn't you just come to me?
Exactly. It's like there are many times when we had tried to come to you, but I think with Pacifica cultures, it's a lot of our older generation are ill-equipped to deal with. So it's not like that they don't want to help, it's just they don't know how to. And the best way that they deal with that is like the way that they have been like...
They shut down.
Yeah, they're like, let's not talk about this because...
And so there is no closure. There is no healing. There is no progress in a lot of cases. We just learn to live and exist with walking trauma. And some people carry that forever and they pass it on to their children.
And especially with Pacific Islanders, difficult for New Zealand born Samoans or New Zealand born Tongans because the culture clash between this Palangi society that we live in and our traditional cultures, they really don't mesh well sometimes, and we don't know where we stand.
Do you? Yeah, fair enough. Do you feel comfortable telling the story that you told me about the girl from your church, the pregnant one?
Yeah. So I won't name names or anything, but so I know this lady. She was pregnant. But her and her partner were still very close. They were engaged to be married. From the outside, things look okay, but obviously that was not the case. She was pregnant, and we woke up one day and we received the news that she had committed suicide while pregnant. And I feel like, especially for our pregnant...
Right, if you're pregnant... See, so something that I want to explain, and so... Partly why this episode is very personal for me because I suffer from PTSD. I've dealt with, off and on various levels of depression all my life. And I've definitely dealt with not just members of my family and friends and people that were close to me that have committed suicide, but struggling with the desire to commit suicide throughout my life. And so something that I want to explain about that is that people that don't know any better or have a hard time dealing with their emotions and feelings and discussing the reality of situations like to treat suicide and depressions like their weaknesses or their act of cowardice and things like that.
Or it's like the gay thing and it can be cured through prayer
right.
and shit like that.
Exactly. And that is such a toxic belief. But it is such an extreme battle and struggle and act of courage to actually make it to a point where you've lost enough and you've suffered enough to take your own life. That is nothing that should ever be belittled. And so for a person, people, when it comes to death, people get very selfish. And we always think about how it affects me and how it makes me feel. And what about your parents? And what about your partner? And what about your children? And we're always like,
what about the village? What are they?
And how selfish it was to everybody who's left alive. And the last question that people rarely ever ask, if they ask it, is, well, what was that person going through for all of these things that mean so much to them to not be enough to keep them alive anymore? And that's such a serious conversation right there, to be pregnant and to have a life inside you, because for a lot of women, not all women, when you are pregnant, your baby and your child's survival supersedes everything. It's chemical, it's genetic, it's like in our DNA to be geared towards the survival of our young. And she had to have been going through so much that not even her spouse, but her baby's life wasn't enough to keep her alive. And if we don't understand how serious these conversations are and how much they need to be had as a result of a situation like that, then you know what I mean. It's a problem, and so this is us. So I am my brother's keeper. Okasan is her sister's keeper, and that on a micro level, like we talked about, we do actively take care of our siblings, because when you grow up with parents that you can't speak to intentionally or unintentionally, no matter what age you are, you kind of have to be the caretaker for your siblings. You have to provide the things your parents weren't capable of. But on a like macro level, on a larger scale, this conversation is us doing that for our community, because there are people, for whatever reason, right now, whether it be homosexuality or sexual abuse,
exactly,
or just like not understanding how to deal with stress or the loss of someone in our community on every aspect and level, that are going through these things right now, have been suffering through these things for days, months, weeks, years, and have never had this conversation.
That's like, especially like you brought up, sexual abuse, domestic violence. These things are prevalent within our Pacifica communities, but they're swept under the rug. So when they're swept under the rug, consequently, mental health that is associated with these, like trauma and PTSD and depression, are too swept under the rug. So it's
not just us, but it is the outside against us. Because when young Palangi and Pakeha are murderers and criminals and shit like that, they're kids. And what was the deeper issue? And what were they going through? And they get treatment before they go to jail. Almost every time, 9 times out of 10. But for us, it's always products of what we come from, and we're criminals, and we're bred towards that. There's almost never the question in urban environments and Pacifica communities, impoverished communities, of the need for mental health treatment, awareness, and support from the community. And so we are taught and understand from the outside and the inside that this is not for us, and this is not real to us, and we don't get proper treatment. And so this is like when we became pregnant, one of the books that I got for us was the black version of what to expect when you're expecting. Because again, part of why I wrote a book is because on the part, and something Louisa and I were talking about, is it is harmful when all the information on how to do good for your community and about your community and what's best for your community comes from people outside of your community.
Yeah.
Because one, they're talking from their best interest, and two, they don't properly understand your needs and your issues. Exactly. And something that came across in the book was that African American women tend to have babies that are smaller and less healthier than Palangi and Pakeha babies, because they don't get the same medical care. They don't have access to the same resources in terms of quality of food and being able to afford vitamins and things like that. And so even though that's a little different in Pacifica, it's not necessarily for healthy reasons, because we have larger babies, but our babies are also born with disproportionate health issues because it's what we're feeding and eating while we're pregnant. So people are like, oh, my baby is super healthy because I'm having 10-pound babies, but your baby also came out with a damn near 5-year-old level of cholesterol. You know what I mean? Like, it's so and this is the same issue that we're discussing on a different level. Like, we as a community and as a people, we don't get funding for the same things. We don't get access to the same things. We don't even get spoken to in the same way about the same things. And so mental health, which is a very real thing, gets treated as like a figment of the imagination, like it's not taken serious. And you know, something that Okasan just said to me before we started this episode, and I have to apologize for it, because we talk to each other about things, and sometimes it's jokingly, but it is still things that we do. And so I'm unintentionally sometimes very dismissive. Never when it comes to mental health, but like I believe in Hellenistic medicine. But when we talk about like childcare and health and things like that, she'll be like, oh, the Samoan massage, or we do this. And I'll be like, all right, you gonna get out of here with that backwoods, like silver under the tongue, keep the baby from being a vampire shit. You know what I mean? And like, she's like, no, really talking about things that she's grown up with. And I have to strive to be less messed up and dismissive about that. Because if we were home in Hawaii and she said, no, my grandmother raised me eating this plant whenever I got sick, I'd be like, well, fuck it, give the baby the plant. And so it's not right for me to be open to that at home in Hawaii and not open to it in Samoa.
That is also the issue within the mental health community in terms of like the services that are being funded. So like, I think there needs to be an introduction of more. So when Samoans, they're probably, or Tongans or Pacific Islanders, they're probably more inclined to go access the resources if they were more suited to their needs, like more, like we put more importance on how we like do things. For example, like I don't know how to explain it.
Well, no, so one way to touch on it and explain it is, so I look through, I'm very fortunate to be able to change positions pretty fluently, work where I want to work. I'm fortunate I have choice, right? And so I see a lot of social work jobs that come up in Aotearoa and Auckland and things like that. And disproportionately, a lot of them are looking for Pacific Islanders and Maori and people who speak a Pacifica language. Mm-hmm. And it's because we do not have enough social workers in our community. And something that's very prevalent in our community, which I don't necessarily disagree with or have a problem with, is we don't really want to talk to or interact with people outside of our community that we don't identify with. And so we have a greater need.
Help, I want someone who looks like me, who talks like me, who understands my culture.
Exactly. And so we have a greater need in our community for social workers, for teachers, and we've even heard ads on the radio for looking for native Te Reo speakers. Like, even if you don't have a teacher's degree, you speak Te Reo, come in, we'll help you, we'll teach you. Mm-hmm. Because we are so lacking in those numbers that it contributes to the issues we have, because there's no one to fill the positions that we need. And the thing that sucks about that and makes that so rough, one of the issues that we've had when it comes to healthcare, like when we go to the doctor that my wife was like born to and has gone to all of her life, and we take our little girl there, it's not acceptable. It sucks, but I'm telling you, like, not even in a prejudiced way, from our end anyway, if we want her to be treated nicely or kindly, we have to ask for Pakea and Palangi nurses or Asian nurses. Because when we go to see our own people, one, they look at her and treat her funny because of her mix and what is she and shit like that. Mm-hmm. Or they're very rough with her like she's not a newborn. When she got her 3-week shots, 3-month shots, the nurse was one of us. She was Pacifica. She was an Islander.
Yeah.
And she was extremely rough. And the way she jammed the needles into her caused her so much pain. And when we went back for her most recent shots, and we got the Pakeha lady that's been nice and friendly and chatty with us since you were pregnant, completely different experience. Mm-hmm. And it's horrible that we have to say that and feel that way about going for things in our own community. And it really is
hard like that way, that because we need more Pacific Islanders in the medical, like mm-hmm. in the health industry.
But almost everyone we've ever, even when we were first pregnant and we went to the doctor for our first visit, the nurse was so dismissive and fucked up, like she didn't even want to be there and didn't even want to talk to us. And it wasn't until she saw how friendly the doctor was with us and how fluid our conversation was with the doctor that she put on a pretend smile and wanted to interact and act like, oh no, everything had been awesome from the beginning, you know. And it's rough because this is something, it's another mental issue
Yeah.
that spreads through our community. Like one thing that we were talking about, because we have business conversations often, and one of the big conversations in the States was the need to support black banks and how big they are. And there was some negative remarks in the community, like, oh, well, how much of my money should I put in that? And is it really going to last? And is it really going to be okay? And the conversation that we had is it would be dope to do that here, but there's so much negativity in our community of assuming like, oh no, that they're going to steal and it's not going to last and it's not going to work out. That is really hard for us to establish things like that. It's like when I went to Tonga, right?
Rough.
When I went to Tonga, we had an issue, right, where some of the bags didn't make it from New Zealand to Tonga. So we flew from Australia to New Zealand to Tonga. The bags got held up in New Zealand, and we had to wait the next day for them to come. And this one lady was mad because she assumed that the Tongans working at the airport stole their luggage. And the lady at the counter was pissed, and she was like, no, because if this was a Palangi place, you wouldn't assume that.
Yeah.
So don't come here, don't come home where you come from and treat us like that and assume that because we still live here that we steal and that we're going to take it. You know what I mean? And it's that mentality. It's that automatic shoot to negativity towards our own that stops us from being able to progress in a lot of these situations. Yeah. And so it's like, it sucks because like we always say, like, yo, stereotypes exist for a reason. So nobody wants to have a stereotype talked about against them or played against them. But then it sucks when you're looking at your best friend and your best friend is living into the stereotype 100%. This shit is like, you fucking me up right now.
Alright, and just something else I want to touch on is, just to put numbers to it, in New Zealand, Pacifica youth are 3 times more likely to commit suicide than European youth. And if you look in our Pacifica communities, which of our people are more likely to commit suicide, and it's evident that it's our men, like our Pacifica men, that are the ones who are really struggling with this. But I feel like that feeds into a lot of like toxic masculinity and our perception of what it means
to be a man. It took so long for me to let go of and move past and stop being party to toxic masculinity and violence and all of the things culturally that are built into us, and just from not being okay with ourselves and not taught to understand ourselves, you know. And this affects us on so many different levels. One of my older cousins was a grown man with a successful music career when he killed himself. Like, I've had friends who didn't make it out of high school because they've killed themselves. And I'm telling you, the only difference between me and them is my sense of duty. Because the only thing that has kept me alive in so many situations when I lost the strength and the will to live was my responsibility to my family and to take care of my family. For me, it is who's going to take care of them, who's going to provide this, who's going to be that. And that should not be the only reason that anyone is staying alive.
Exactly.
We need to have these conversations. This shit is real, because hurt people. It's a cycle. And when we suffer from bipolar and schizophrenia and depression and all of these toxic issues that don't get treated, they get taken out on our families and our children and our spouses, and they continue generationally.
And a lot of our people don't even realize that they are affected by certain things. Like, if you look at how many of our people, not alcoholics, but they turn to alcohol or substances to really curb stress, whether it be financial.
Yeah, even sex is also another one of those things. People, you know, like outside of sexual addictions, there are people that so when we talk, we slander young women more than we do men about being sexually promiscuous, but you have a lot of people who were sexually abused, and the only way they know to look for acceptance or connection is through sex, because that's their earliest, and you have a lot of young men that try and find their masculinity or their acceptance with themselves by running through females and consuming their bodies. Yeah. And so we can't take away not just alcohol abuse, but a lot of the coping mechanisms that people use.
Yeah. So I think we really need to, especially within the Pacifica culture and for our men, take away this perception that mental health issues, talking about these issues is
our weakness.
Yeah.
Our
when
weakness.
It is not. It really isn't.
And one of the funny things, and this is a not funny topic, but one of the funny things about this conversation, we know I'm always about that action. This is one of those things where just a conversation can save someone's life.
Yeah.
Just a conversation can change someone's world. Just a conversation can heal a family. Mm-hmm. And it takes a lot of conversations sometimes, but a conversation is one of the simultaneously easiest and hardest things to do, because you got to have an open mind, and you got to be in a place to heal, and you have to want it, and you have to be like, you know what I mean? There's so many people that don't want to be to blame for the shit that's wrong with their kids, that they can't even listen to what's wrong with their kids because they're on the defense, instantly. But this is one thing that doesn't take $1 million to fix.
Exactly.
It just takes us caring about each other and being open to finding new ways to do that.
Yeah. So if we are 3 times more likely to commit suicide, or if we have depression, anxiety more than our European, people, yet we are less likely to try and access these mental health services that exist. There's clearly an issue in that equation. So I think if we're not going to these services that are available, that are funded, then it is really up to our community and to our churches and to our families to step up and really take part in the conversation around, because
church is such a big part of that conversation, because churches, whether you're Pacifica, Latino, Black, if you are ethnic people, brown people, Black people tie into Christianity more hardcore than white people ever will. Exactly. And it's shit that was given to us by them, and it rules our cultures. But the church has to create open conversations and safe spaces on these issues, because a lot of them stem from the church.
Yeah.
And sin and guilt, and that you're gonna burn in hell mindset, and that hate the sin, not the sinner shit. So the church has a greater responsibility. I feel like the greatest responsibility for this is the church, the parents, and the government. And it's not
this is something from this is so hilarious from you, who's like, fuck the government, we don't need shit from them, we gotta do it for ourselves. And now it's like
but yeah,
government funding is very much needed,
right? And if so, yeah, listen, I'm about that. And this is still one of those things where I think we need our own facilities and our own. There is no such thing for me as any topic where I think we don't need to own our own shit and provide our own services. So this applies to that as well.
And we will put in links to Pacifica initiatives that are out there for people dealing with. We will put in
links to all suicide and mental health prevention and places to get help, whether you're based in Samoa, where a lot of our listenership is, New Zealand, Australia, Hawaii, or the mainland. We will provide as many links and global telephone numbers as possible for places to talk to when you're looking for help. And on that note, since apparently we have visitors, we're going to end this episode. You have anything else you want to say?
No. Please use the links if you really are in a stressful situation, or just reach out, get help.
And we'll talk to you guys next time. And thank you for joining us. And thank you for talking about having this conversation with us, family, and allowing us in your home. Because talo falava, you know what I mean? Like, we really do love and care about you and our people and us, and this is why we have this talk. Thanks for joining us, guys.